Hi, it's me. I'm doing another one of these. Hence why you probably also saw a horribly clickbaity TF2 video drop right before it, but I'm assuming if you clicked on this video, you're not here for that. You are here for this. Awesome, right? Now, if that's all you came to see, feel free to click off, no hard feelings. But if you want to see how it was made, stick around. Let me tell you a little bit about the angriest, most badass fire ganassi on this side of Alephthalin. This is Bicker Butterfly Metalmark, a fire ganassi and our party's Barbarian, and also fighter, played by our friend Maya. Now, typically Barbarians aren't spellcasters, but Bicker is able to gain access to a little bit of magic thanks to her being a fire ganassi, and also thanks to her taking the path of wild magic. As if the Rage, Great Axe, and impending action surge wasn't already terrifying enough. Anyway, whenever Bicker uses her bonus action to go into a rage, in addition to rolling on a path-specific wild magic table, she'll also often use her action to cast Burning Hands. It's a pretty straightforward first-level spell. It lets you shoot fire out of your hands in a 15-foot cone. Anybody caught in that cone has to make a dexterity saving throw or take 3d6 fire damage, or half as much if they succeed on the save. It also ignites any flammable objects in the area that aren't being worn or carried. It's a really fun spell to cast. Lots of flavor, scales reasonably well, and honestly is just cool as hell. But according to the spell's wording, the caster has to hold their hands with thumbs touching and fingers spread, and the effect is a thin sheet of flames shooting forth from your outstretched fingertips. It's pretty specific, but if last episode's special beam attack was any indication, we tend to play things fast and loose here at the Sabs and Sound household. Rule of cool beats rules as written almost every time. So I talked to Maya about how they think the spell looks when Bicker casts it, and they described it like this. To cast Burning Hands, Bicker punches forward with both hands together like firebending. Her hair, eyes, and freckles glow brighter, and the inside of her mouth burns like the Balrogs does in Lord of the Rings when she says the verbal component. Definitely more aggressive and way cooler than just a thin sheet of flames. Just like last time, I worked together with an animator to give y'all a visual reference, and this time the animator in question was my friend Erin, an insanely talented artist and also a player in our D&D game. To get her started, I sent over a very professional storyboard of roughly what I had in mind. It basically flows like a victory animation from a Netherrealm fighting game, like Mortal Kombat or Injustice, right? You know, where like the character just kind of does some cool flips and then attacks nothing in particular. Bicker runs forward and vaults into the air with her Great Axe. In the air, the spell starts charging, she lands, we get a cool shot of her hand as the charging finishes, cool impact frames and all that, and then a massive jet of fire rockets out of her fists. And as you saw at the beginning, Erin took that reference of questionable quality and made something way fucking better. So, we've got our description, we've got our visual reference, and now we need a plan. My goals for this design are as follows. Number one, I want to focus on fire and recording sources that tend to mesh well with fire. I mean, yeah, duh. Number two, the spell should sound more aggressive than a normal fire spell. After all, this is the thing that Bicker usually opens with on the round that she rages, so the design should convey rage. Number three, I'd like to introduce vocals into the design, which is something that the previous one lacked. Number four, the design should stay true to Maya's description, so I want to maintain a connection to the thing that they likened it most to, which was firebending. And number five, everything needs to seem powerful, even down to the footsteps. It should be chunky, crunchy, just really focus in on the dynamics and make sure everything feels like it's not being cast by a wimpy little wizard with a stupid D6 hit dice. This is a goddamn magic barbarian. We're rolling D12s out here. I mean, look at how much cooler that is. It just feels good to roll, so the same principle applies here. Except, you know, the D12 is decapitated. All right, time to get some source. Not that source. Generally speaking, I like to record a lot of my own stuff when I design sounds, but with that being said, we're gonna be working a lot with fire, and as you can probably guess, fire is notoriously tricky and dangerous to record. So I'm gonna lean pretty heavily on some sample libraries for this one, but even so, I'd still like to get some practice in, so I want to record at least one fire-based thing. Enter the whoosh bottle. Longtime viewers of my channel might remember that way back in the day, I used to work at a science museum for families and kids, just doing the whole, you know, experiments and birthday parties routine. I'd do these demonstrations and activities with the kids to teach them about really basic science concepts like aerodynamics and pH and, you know, simple stuff. One of the most common demonstrations we do, though, was called the whoosh bottle. Basically, it works like this. You take a large container with a small opening, like this 5-gallon water jug, and spray some high-proof isopropyl alcohol in it. Then you swish the bottle around a little bit to coat the inside and cause the fuel to evaporate. The gases expand and distribute evenly throughout the bottle, which gives us a bunch of surface area to burn. And because the fuel is denser than air, it just kind of sits there. When you light the fuel, a combustion reaction happens, resulting in fire, water, and carbon dioxide being created. Then the carbon dioxide rapidly expands, gets forced out of the bottle, and creates a neat little whoosh sound. I figure if I were to record something like this and slow it down a bit, we could end up with a nice layer for a flamethrower-like spell. To make sure we've got plenty of wiggle room to pitch shift and time shift the sound around, I set it up with a high sample rate and bit depth recorder with an ultra wide range microphone. I also set it up with a cheap contact mic, which I didn't really expect much from, but I thought it might be fun to try anyway. I ended up recording it in the garage, which I will be the first to admit is not ideal for acoustics, but I'd really rather play it safe and deal with some early reflections if it means I don't set my house on fire. So here's how it went. Yeah, I think that'll work.
Hell yeah. Science rules.
Pretty cool.
Angry bottle.
Honestly, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, when it comes to less dangerous and less interesting stuff, I'm gonna go through it pretty quickly. I just recorded a whole bunch of things that I could use for sweeteners, like ripping cardboard, ripping paper, and the sound of an iron sizzling on a wet towel. I also recorded a bunch of clothing foley and footsteps that I performed the animation. Now let's start putting everything together. Watching the animation back again, we've got 5 different sections that I'll break this into. We got the footsteps, cloth sounds, and other Foley stuff. There's the vocals, there's the jump and land motion, there's the charge up sequence, and there's the blast and the tail. The first section of the general Foley is easy enough. I cleaned up my recorded samples in RX8, lined everything up with the animation, and added in a bit of compression and saturation to beef everything up and make it sound more powerful. After that, I bust the tracks out to a reverb send to place it into a space. For more realistic spaces, normally we'd want to be using a convolution reverb. This is a type of reverb that uses impulse responses, which are tails recorded from real-world physical spaces. But in this case, since there's no background for the animation, we can get away with an algorithmic reverb that just models real-world spaces, but with more control and creative freedom. This way, we can kind of just dial in something that sounds cool and isn't necessarily an exact recreation of a physical space. Here's what we're looking at so far. Next up is vocals. I did ask Maya if they wanted to voice Bicker for this, but they said they're not super into the whole voice acting scene, so instead I found some samples of efforts and screams in one of my existing libraries. Then I added some compression, did a bit of volume automation, added some pitch shifting and other stuff, layered it with a cool growly sample, and that was it. Next, let's tackle that jump and land motion. First, I added a metal impact for when Bicker slams her axe on the ground. Pretty straightforward, whoosh, ring out layered with the whoosh, impact, done. But the jump itself is a little bit more complicated. When somebody jumps normally, in real life, it doesn't really sound that impressive. But oftentimes in like cartoons or superhero movies or anime or like, you know, anything where like a superhuman character launches into the air, there's like this impact that just gives it a little bit of extra oomph. I wanted to create one of my own for this, which helps to kind of illustrate the idea that Bicker is launching herself into the air with her fire magic. I did this by combining a heavy footstep, a fire burst, the noise that silencers make in movies for some reason, a smoke bomb, and a simple processed whoosh. A lot of these were library pulls, but a couple to take note of were that smoke bomb and fire burst, both of which were pulled from a library by the recordist, who you're probably going to be seeing a lot more of in this video. Anyway, put everything together and you get this. All right, not bad. I also wanted to have something for the part where she like flails around in the air a little bit and stabilizes herself, so I used a flame jet sound pulled from, oh hey, he's already back, another recordist library. Then there's a fire whoosh as she nears the ground, and the landing sound was just a pretty standard body fall noise. Here's everything we have so far. The charge up sequence was very fun to put together. This is where I used the iron on the towel sound. I put some saturation, pitch shifting, and formant shifting on it and ended up turning it into like this cool riser-like thing. Next, I layered that with the sound of the whoosh bottle, but slowed down and reversed. To make it fit in with the charging up riser thing that I was going for, I added a frequency shifter. Oh, and decapitator. The contact mic recording of that was pretty garbage, as expected, but it wasn't totally unsalvageable. It had this really interesting tonal element to it that happened as the combustion reaction burned through the fuel. So I didn't even really have to do any pitch shifting on this one. I just put some basic distortion and EQ to focus on the high end, and that was it. This is the part where I really start to lean on my sample libraries. I took another recordist fireburst, duplicated it, reversed it, and then put it back to back with the forwards one. This helps to accent the ignition in the palm, followed by the closing of the fist. Next is a sample of another really cool fire trick called a pulse jet jar. This one is a little different from a whoosh bottle in that the combustion reaction creates a vacuum. This sucks more oxygen back into the jar and causes it to burn in short, sharp attacks instead of a continuous burn. What this means for us sound designers, in simpler terms, is that it sounds sick as fuck. I want to snip out that part of the sample where the engine-like sound is first starting up and then layer it with the rest of the charge up. For the sake of time, I'll move pretty quickly through the next set of sounds for the charge up. I added a sample of an actual flamethrower. This weird morph absorb sample is a sweetener for that. Another fire burst for when Bicker closes her fist. Also for the fist close, a constant chemical burn with some volume automation. And a distorted heavy footstep as a sweetener for that. Here's everything we have so far. All right, that's a pretty good charge up, but I feel like we can do better. I want to add some more sweeteners to this. Since this is a barbarian and all, I thought it might be fun to add in some vocal growling sounds, just to really hammer home the idea that this spell is coming from the caster's rage. And finally, I wanted to add that kind of downer sound that you hear in movie trailers all the time, you know, like this. They typically work well in big tension-filled moments, so I figured one of those might fit here. But as much as I would love to use Head Pounder for this, it's not really a sci-fi design, so even as a joke, this doesn't really fit here. I need to find a downer that is more organic and also fits the fire motif. Luckily, I have just the thing. The Combustion library by Collected Transients has a bunch of weird fire shit that you can play around with. It's where I got the Pulse Jet Jar sample from. And they also have one called a Roaring Pipe, which is basically just combustible fumes being ignited inside of a large metal pipe. It seems really simple, but get a load of how it sounds. Fucking awesome. And also exactly what we need. So I stuck that on the end. Here's our final charge up sequence. Fantastic. Hey, future editing SoundSmith here. Erin just sent over her latest effects pass and she added this really cool little touch where the fire sort of snakes down Bicker's arm as it creates the orb. And my original idea was that it was just gonna like have her arm glow a little, and this is way cooler. So I'm gonna add in a small layer to the charge up that goes along with that. It's a fuse from Paul Stoughton's Dark Magic library that came out a few months back. Here's what it sounds like. You get the idea. Right, so I put saturation on it because of course I did, and then I was going to put tremolator on it to create that sense of movement as it snakes around the arm. But then what I realized is that the orb keeps pulsing as it gets more and more intense throughout the charge up, and that's something that I can create the illusion of with tremolator. So I just extended the fuse out throughout the entire charge up and then automated the depth of the oscillator to go along with that. And then I did the same thing with the saturator, and now it sounds like this. Pretty straightforward. Here's what it sounds like with the rest of the charge up. Okay, cool, thanks. Back to SoundSmith from like 6 months ago. Okay, time for the main event, the blast itself. First, let's start with that whoosh bottle. Even when it's slowed down a bit, it's not quite long enough to stretch for the amount of time that I want it to, so I did an admittedly imperfect loop of the middle part. I'll cover it up with effects, don't worry. To that end, this big-ass effects chain here is intended to do 3 things. 1 is to cover up the shitty loop, 2 is to add some power to it, and 3 is to focus on the high end. I can fill out the low end with samples and sweeteners just fine, but the firebending in Avatar had a lot of really interesting high end to it, so I want to honor that in the design to stay true to how Maya described it. Oh, and also I added a frequency shifter to the start of the whoosh, which makes it sound more cool and spell-like. Here it is with all the effects applied. That's pretty good, but we still need it to sound more powerful. And of course, as I'm sure you all heard in the last video, the best way to make something sound more powerful is layers! I layered this with a ton of other things. A gas ignition sound, a torch whoosh run through tremolator, the buildup of a stuttering fire whoosh I designed a while back, an explosion sound with some transient shaping and a sub-impulse generator, a low-end sweetener on top of that, all manner of cloth, paper, and cardboard ripping that's just been absolutely destroyed with distortion. 3 different flamethrower samples, each saturated and EQ'd to focus on a different part of the frequency spectrum. And finally, some LFE rumble to pull everything together. Oh, and also to beef up the tail, back we go to our old friend the recordist, grab an explosion, cut out the tail, slap it on the end there, and now we have this. Perfect. Now that everything's in place, I routed all of the sustained flamethrower sounds out to an aux track and put some compression, more saturation, and an instance of tremolator on it. I know I use that a lot, but it gives some nice variety to the blast and lets me add little touches to match the animation. And finally, I sent everything out to its own reverb separate from the Foley and the other stuff. This way I can use a different reverb on it to make it sound more spell-like. And here is everything for the blast put together. Yeah, I'm really happy with that. Okay, that was a bit of a slog, but we got there. Now that everything's in place, let's do a little bit of last-minute mixing. Put on any EQ just to make sure that everything is sitting well together, slap a limiter on the master because I'm lazy, and then we're all set. Here is the final design for this just absolutely insane animation of burning hands. Holy hell, this one was so much fun. I feel like we checked off all the boxes pretty solidly when it comes to our original goals, so I'm definitely really happy with how it turned out. At this point, I am having so much fun with this that I really just want to do one of these for every member of the party. Erin's Bloodhunter has actually been blowing up on TikTok lately, so I imagine there's a lot of demand for that character from the LGBT Tiefling mains, but we also have a Drow Sorcerer, a Turtle Paladin, a Half-Elf Rogue, and Fantasy Colonel Sanders over here, who is my Lore Bard. I'm eventually gonna do one for everyone, but I do want to know which character y'all would be interested in hearing something for next, so, you know, do that thing. Yeah, I still don't know how to end these. Okay, the next man's guide is gonna be for the